Ukraine's agreed to the US proposal of an immediate ceasefire for 30 days in its fight against the Russian invasion. Now, this accord is expected to mean a resumption of US military aid for Ukraine, as well as intelligence sharing. Their removal had handed Russia a key strategic advantage just a week ago, and Putin's forces stepped up bombing ever since. The talks, of course, in Saudi Arabia, hosted by the Saudis in Jeda. The US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, concluding thus: the ball is now in Moscow's court. Volodymyr Zelensky's top aide at the talks, Andriy Yermak, says this will now show if Vladimir Putin and Russia want peace or not. Well, let's hear from Mike Waltz, the US National Security Advisor, who is part of the American negotiating team.
I think as a result of this positive step forward, the president has decided to lift the pause on aid and on our security assistance to Ukraine going forward. And that's effective immediately.
Mike Waltz and Marco Rubio there in Jeddah. Let's bring in David Smith, Bureau Chief of The Guardian newspaper, joining us from Washington, D.C. David, a very good evening to you. Big moves there in Jeddah, it seems, but of course, the Russians still need to agree.
Yes, indeed. After this 3-year war, this is potentially an important breakthrough, a 30-day ceasefire to which Ukraine seemed to agree pretty quickly, and in return, the US announcing it will no longer suspend intelligence sharing or supply of weapons. And as you heard Secretary of State Marco Rubio say, the ball is in Russia's court. He was asked by reporters, what is the deadline for a Russian response to this proposal, and he said just as soon as possible. Donald Trump wanted this war to end yesterday or the day before, and right now we do not know how the Russians will respond to this. And Rubio said, if they refuse, then we will know where the barrier to peace is. So that's possibly a significant shift in momentum, because for the past few weeks it seems like the US has almost been blaming Ukraine for this ongoing conflict, and that may no longer be the case. We also heard from Ukrainian President Zelensky in a statement welcoming today's talks and saying the American side understands our arguments. It's now about silence in the sea and sky, and also building trust, possibly with exchange of prisoners with Russia.
Indeed. Of course, the devil's in the details, the phrase goes. Do we have any idea what the terms and conditions of this accord might be, David?
No, very little. And when Rubio and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz were asked about that, their default was, we need to secure peace first before we can talk about those details, such as prisoner swaps. So I think skeptics will point out, this is a potentially important breakthrough, but there is still a long way to go here. Will the Russians even agree? And if they do, what sort of restrictions will they seek to impose? We've heard the US speaking along the lines of, clearly Russia is not going to take over Ukraine, but at the same time, it's also unrealistic that there would be a return to the 2014 borders when Russia started its invasion. And the devil in those details of just how much land is the US asking Ukraine to surrender here, and how acceptable will that be remains to be seen. The logic seems to be, get a truce in place first, and then we will talk.
Do we read into this that there is now a tangible improvement in US-Ukraine relations, or is that too soon to say?
I think it's fair to say some kind of improvement there. The Ukrainian official attending these talks described them as constructive. Zelensky was positive. And certainly these US representatives, Rubio and Waltz, also seemed pretty upbeat about the way the Ukrainians had responded. Now, they haven't actually signed the minerals deal yet, which, of course, Zelensky was supposed to do at the White House before that blow up, that diplomatic nightmare that unfolded. Maybe that will come. And I suppose the other big test we have to see now is, will we get a statement from Donald Trump? Will he be more warm and welcoming in his rhetoric to Ukraine? Because obviously, in recent months and indeed years, we've had this a very curious situation where he does seem more sympathetic to Vladimir Putin and Russia in his public statements.
David Smith, Bureau Chief of The Guardian newspaper in Washington, D.C., as always. Thank you for joining us and bringing that light we need shed on this very complex story. David Smith there from The Guardian joining us from Washington. So it seems that we're on the path towards some kind of peace in Ukraine, with Ukraine agreeing to that immediate ceasefire proposed by the United States for 30 days. We now await, of course, Moscow's reply. Angela Diffley joins us, our international